All right. Well, this summer, I'm teaching a series on the parables, and depending on how you define a parable, there's between 30 to 42 parables that Jesus spoke in the Gospels in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And a parable is really just it's a short story that gives a moral or a spiritual lesson. And they were fictional stories, but they were stories that were relatable in time, you know. Like last we talked about the parable of the sower. A farmer wanted to sow his seed, and these things were happening as Jesus was talking. So Jesus would use parables to kind of highlight or emphasize the truths that he was trying to teach the people. So he would teach them, and then he would give them a natural example by things that were going on around them. And so this morning, we're going to talk about the parable of the rich fool. And it's found in Luke chapter 12, verse 13 through 21. And I'm going to read it in the New Living Translation. It says this: "Then someone called from the crowd, 'Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me.' And Jesus replied, 'Friend, who made me judge over you to decide such things as that?' Then he said, 'Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own.' And then he told a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. And he said to himself, 'What should I do? I don't have room for all of my crops.' Then he said, 'I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods, and I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God.'" And so this parable really is about somebody who puts material possessions or wealth, or really who puts anything above God. And so we can be wealthy, but if we don't have a rich relationship with God, we can be popular, we can be famous, we can be intelligent, we can be smart, but if we don't have a rich relationship with God, the whole point of this parable, Jesus said, if you leave out your relationship with God, that's a very, very foolish thing to do. So, you know, Jesus is teaching, he's talking to the crowd, and a man from the crowd just kind of pipes up, and he calls on Jesus to settle a family monetary dispute. How many of you know if there's a family dispute? How many know that family disputes can get ugly? Come on now. And so what would happen in the first century, if you had a dispute over money or anything like that, you had to go to court. But a lot of these people would go to the rabbis and try to get some type of mediation from the rabbis so they wouldn't have to go to court. And so Jesus just doesn't take the bait. And so maybe the lesson for us is, hey, don't get involved with disputes that aren't your business, right? That don't pertain to you. And so Jesus said, I'm not here to get involved in your earthly affairs and disputes. I'm here to bring spiritual life. And Jesus said, he said, guard against every kind of greed. That word greed there in the Greek, it's pleonexia. And it means striving for material possessions, a greedy desire for more. And you know, you don't have to be rich or wealthy to have a striving for more. Don't we live in the more society? You know, we just want more. It's very interesting. John D. Rockefeller, who, way back in the day, he I don't even know how much money he would have today, but it would be hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, he was the richest man in the world for some time, but he was a philanthropist, and he gave a tremendous amount of money away. But they asked him one time, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? And he said, just a little more. And I mean, he said that jesting, he said that joking, just a little bit. What was he saying is, you know, you'll never have enough to where you say, okay, that's I don't need any more. That greed. materialism, possessions, that striving for more, it just never goes away. And I mean, if you've had the luxury of traveling around the world, you realize that the affluence in America and the Western culture is just off the charts compared to how most people live. But most people in Western culture, they still need more. They need a bigger house. Well, 4 bedrooms isn't enough. They need nicer cars. And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with having nice cars, nice houses. The problem is if your possessions have you. If they possess you, because if possessions possess you, it'll never be enough. And even when you get to where you think you would be happy, it's still not enough. So, there are not many places in the Bible where God calls people a fool. There's 2 in the book of Psalms. Psalms 14 verse 1 says this: "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." And that same verse is repeated in Psalms 53. So God says if somebody is a God denier, if somebody denies the existence of God, if somebody denies that God is the creator of earth, then that person is a fool. They're foolish. But this rich man in our story, this rich materialist, God calls him a fool. Jesus calls him a fool. So really, this man is put in the same category as a God denier. You say, now, he may have believed in God, but he was living his life independently of God. So even if we say we believe in God, but our whole life is lived without the intervention of God, without wanting God to intervene in our life, wanting to do whatever we want, that we fall in this classification of a fool. And many of us here may think, that this parable really doesn't apply to us simply because you may not have accumulated financial assets. But I believe there are several principles, from this story that we can take from this parable and apply to our lives. And again, every time you read something, there's always bits and pieces and truths that we can apply to our life. And the first one is this. Obviously, in this parable, what Jesus is referring to is the sin of misusing wealth. Now, you don't have to be rich to misuse wealth. I mean, if you don't, we're going to be accountable for everything we've done. So even if you're not wealthy, if you're misusing, if you're not being a good steward of the finances and the resource that God has blessed you with, well, that misuse would be a sin. So again, some have the idea that being rich is sinful and being poor is virtuous or pious. And again, this isn't taught anywhere in the Bible. As a matter of fact, some of God's most faithful servants in the Bible were extremely wealthy. Abraham was extremely wealthy. He didn't start off wealthy, but God blessed him. Job was incredibly wealthy. If you read in the book of Acts there, we know that some of the early church members were very wealthy because it says that many of them were selling their possessions, selling land, selling possessions they did need, and taking that money and bringing it to the church to give directly to the poor and the needy, and also to the church for whatever the church may need. So again, God wants us to be blessed. If we're not blessed, how can we give anything away? I mean, if you're poor, how can you help anyone? How can you help anyone? If God wants His church, the universal church, churches everywhere, to help the poor, to help the needy, to spread the gospel around the world, how can we do that if the church is deficient of funds? And so, there's nothing wrong with God blessing us. I mean, as a matter of fact, God told Abraham, "I'm going to bless you." What was the purpose of God blessing Abraham? So he could be a blessing. I'm going to bless you so you can be a blessing. The whole world will be blessed through you. But let's look at some scriptures where the Bible specifically says that God wants to bless us. He wants to fill our cups. He wants us to have an abundance. Deuteronomy 8:18. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms His covenant, which He swore to your ancestors as it is today. 1 Chronicles 29:12. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. 3 John verse 2 says, Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. So you notice in what John is saying, listen, I want you to prosper in all things. I want you to prosper financially. I want you to prosper relationally. I want you to prosper spiritually. I want your soul to prosper. So what is John saying? That God's idea is he doesn't want anything in your life to be deficient. He doesn't want any area in your life, to be lacking. So, God wants to bless his people. We should expect to be blessed, but we just have to make sure that we don't start worshiping the blessings instead of God. So like any other gift God gives, wealth is to be used in his service, and through wealth, one can lay up treasures in heaven. Paul wrote to his spiritual son Timothy in Ephesus, and he says this, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good needs, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for this coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And so he's saying, look, I want you to be blessed, but, in other words, he talks about, hey, that if you are wealthy, if you are and I just want to say this, that all of us in this room are blessed beyond measure compared to a lot of people around the world. But the thought is this, that we don't get arrogant about God's blessings that he gives us, because money is so uncertain, but to put our hope in God. So what that means is, if your hope is in God and you lose everything you have, you're not despondent, because God is your hope. Way back in the 1920s when the Great Depression, when everything crashed, they said that if you walk down Wall Street, that you had to walk in the middle of the street because so many of the traders were jumping out of windows. Like their life was over because they had been bankrupt. And so we can't, the whole thing is not to put our hope, our faith, and all of our love into the material things. But material things are good, because if we're blessed, we can be rich in good deeds, we can be generous, we can be willing to share, and this way we can lay up treasures in heaven. One of the things I think, we get so consumed with the temporary world, the natural realm. But any of you that give here to Family Life, and especially support our India missions, one day when you get to heaven, there's going to be, I believe, several 100,000 people from India and Nepal that are going to be in heaven because we gave. That's storing up treasures for yourself in heaven. So how do we do this? We do this by helping the poor. We do this by helping the needy. We do this by supporting the gospel, the kingdom of God, by providing for his family, among other things. And a lot of people never think that if God blesses us with something additional, maybe it's because he wants us to do something good with it. I mean, how many times you get a bonus, you get unexpected money, and you've already spent it 10 times before you deposit it in the bank, right? And the only problem is you have a spouse. They have ideas about spending it too. But do we ever stop and think, wow, God has blessed us with this. This is extra. Do we ever stop and pray and think, man, I wonder what God had in mind for me to do this. Like you notice our rich landowner here, the thought never crosses his mind. He's like, man, I can't even spend it all. I can't even store it all. I need to build bigger barns. The thought never even crossed his mind is, well, maybe I don't need to build bigger barns. Maybe I need to give some to the people around me who don't have enough. The thought never even, it never even crossed his mind. So wealth has a tendency to entangle us, and wealth tends to trap us into really self-absorption, materialism, and insensitivity to others. And this is what it had done to the rich man. When his wealth increased, he thought only of himself. The rich man, he spoke 61 words. 61 words is all he spoke. And 11 of the 61, he referred to himself. I, my, mine. 11, so he spoke 61 words, and 11 of them were all about himself. No words are about anyone else. It's just about himself and how he can protect himself and how he can enjoy everything that God had blessed him with. Now, here's the thing. Without a question, I want to stop and say this. This man was actually very good at what he did, and this man worked. Have you ever known a farmer that didn't work? And this man had been working hard, and all of his fruit and all of his diligence paid off. But then the thought never goes to, well, maybe I need to share some of what I have with others. Here's another thought. If he was such a good farmer, he never even had the thought of, maybe I can teach some of the young farmers how to do better. Maybe I can teach 10 other young farmers how they can be wealthy, how God can bless them, how to make improvements and how they grow their crops. The late theologian William Barclay, he told a story one time. It was a story about a self-centered young lady named Edith. And he said, Edith lived in a little world bounded on the north, the south, the east, and the west by Edith. It's all. Did y'all did not understand that, or y'all just looking at me? I don't. Sometimes y'all look at me, I'm like, I don't know if they get it. Like, sometimes I think something's funny and no one laughs, so I guess it's not funny. So I guess I have a better sense of humor. I'm kidding. So again, it's interesting that most Americans would never consider. I would assume that most of you have read this parable, but you never thought in any way that it applied to you. I think sometimes we read the Bible and we take the main point. We never think, okay, well, how does this apply to me? Is there anything that has my heart and is pushing God out? And yet, we live in a prosperous nation, and every year, I do all the studies every year, fewer and fewer people actually give to anything outside of their own family. Every year, the monetary tithes and offerings given to church is less. Every year, like in America, everyone's generous. Oh yeah, we need to help people. But the amount of people that actually help, that have actually helped someone pay their water bill, that have actually helped a single mother, the numbers are going down. So what I'm saying is, we have to make sure that when God blesses us, we use some of it for His kingdom and some of it to help other people. The Romans had a proverb that went like this. They said that money was like seawater. The more you drink of it, the thirstier you become. And so it is with a man's attitude that this rich fool, the more that he got, the more he just wanted to enjoy it, the more he wanted to keep, the more he wanted to store for himself. So let's go through some things in this story. The first principle we see from this rich fool, this farmer who just, was incredibly wealthy, he never saw anything beyond himself. And this is a great problem in society today. We see it all the time, that people have a hard time seeing anyone else's perspective. You know what's very difficult? It's very difficult in today's climate to have a conversation with somebody that believes different than you. Because most people don't even want to have a conversation because they are sure that they're right and everyone else is wrong. And so he never thought about anyone except himself. And again, there's no other parable in all the parables Jesus told. There's no other parable that is so full of the words, I, me, mine. I, me, and mine. There's no other one. So the rich fool, he was aggressively self-centered. But the second thing is, he never saw beyond this world. It was all about this world. Man, I have worked hard now. I'm going to enjoy long life. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my time here. And he never even thought of that there's a world beyond this one. That this world is short, but we're all moving toward eternity. He never even saw anything. And so all of his plans were made on the basis of life here on earth. And he lived in the natural, temporary world. And he never even considered eternity. And sometimes we can get so busy in this life. And we need to remember, this life is a dress rehearsal. You're not going to be in this life very long. We're moving on. And the thought is this. Let me back up. Last week on Wednesday, I told the story of, in 1921, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries, of the 20th century was, I believe it was a British archaeologist discovered the unspoiled tomb of King Tut. And what's different is all these pharaohs' tombs, they had found a lot of them, but they had been raided and robbed. But they went into the sealed tomb of King Tut. He had a gold casket, and he had everything around him for the afterlife, because in their thinking, they were polytheistic, that when you died, you came back as someone else. So they would put in their grave sites everything they would need. So there was corn to plant a crop. There were all these things. But the thought is this, is that we should be storing up treasures in heaven while we're here. So when we get there, we already have fruit in heaven. And we can't just think about this life, and it's easy. We get so busy and we're doing things it's very easy to do. And the third thing is this, is that this rich man was living life with unrealistic expectations. I want to spend the rest of the time here this morning. He had unrealistic expectations. The first unrealistic expectation was that he thought he had many more years to live. I've done all this, now I can enjoy it. And God said, tonight, your life is going to be reckoned. You're not going to see tomorrow. So again, James 4:14 says, why you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. So we have to quit thinking. We have to keep going through life, and we do things. We're saving, hopefully we're saving for retirement. We don't know if we'll live old enough to retire. I mean, you have to do it, or you're supposed to do it. But so again, the thought is, we can't wrongly think that we're guaranteed anything in this life. We can't wrongly think that we have a certain amount of years to live, or we just can't do that. The second thing, unrealistic expectation, is that his hard work earned him the right to be self-absorbed. Obviously, he had plenty of money, and he could have easily given a portion of it away without affecting his life. He could have helped train other farmers, provided his insight and expertise to help them be successful. But what he thought is, man, I have worked very hard. And now I'm not going to work anymore. I'm going to do nothing. I'm not worried about anyone else. I'm not going to help anyone else. I am just going to live off what I have. The third thing is he thought he had the right to use his resources as he pleased. Again, there's no thought to, well, let me see what God wants me to do. There's no thought of God. There's no thought of, well, let me see around who's in need. It was all about him. And so that's an unrealistic expectation. If we belong to Christ, then really it's not just money. Our time, our talents, our resources, we should always pray and say, God, how do you want us to use these resources? And I'm really big on this. Tracy and I, we both have the gift of giving, and we give a lot of things away. There's some things we don't give to because I don't feel led to give. I mean, sometimes people ask things, and I'm like, well, for me, that's not what God's calling me to do. But the thought is, you pray about it. Which things do you want to, because think about it. I think everyone obviously should support the church they go to. But what about some other things? We can't give to everything. So which ones do you feel God calling you to give to? And then the last thing is, an unrealistic thought is that he was not going to be accountable for his selfish choices. And all of us are going to be accountable. All of us are going to stand before the Lord, and we're going to give account for how we live. So again, the thought here is, well, let's live today so that when we stand before the Lord, it's a good reunion. We get some rewards, some things like that. So I want to stay with this thought for a few minutes. I believe that unrealistic expectations are one of the greatest problems we have in society today. Unrealistic expectations are the greatest source of relational problems. It's the greatest source of people getting offended, of people being hurt. He's like, well, what's that? Well, I'm not friends with them anymore. Why? Well, and it's just, they didn't meet an expectation. They didn't meet an expectation. And the problem is, like here in the Houston area, we live in a very diverse area. In our church, we have 30 nations representing our church. So all these different ethnicities, all these different countries. So everyone has a different view on life. Everyone has a different perspective on life or a different expectation on life. And the only way that someone can know what your expectations are is if you tell them. People can't read your mind. And so let's go through this a minute. Where do our expectations come from? How do we form our expectations? Number one, how we were raised, our family of origin. What country we were raised in. Were you raised poor? Were you raised in a middle-class family? Were you raised in an affluent home, a wealthy home? Our culture, the culture that you're raised in. And, sometimes I hear the news, but without question, of all the cultures in our church, and every time I go to different places, I've been to 30, 35 different nations. Every culture is different. There's different expectations everywhere you go. So you've got to learn what those expectations are when you go somewhere so that you don't offend anybody accidentally. So our life experiences, all the things that we've experienced in life, and then what we consider normal behavior. So what happens when our expectations are not met? First of all, we get frustrated. Second of all, we get angry. Third, we get hurt. And fourth, we get offended. And so again, I realize this. One of the main things is, like, for example, even in marriage, you go into your marriage with expectations. Most probably your partner does not have the same expectations. Now, you're living in the same home. You've committed to a lifelong of love. But you don't even have the same expectations of the person you married to. And the only way you can get over that is there has to be communication. You should never get mad, offended, or hurt at somebody if you've never communicated your expectations. Let that sink in. You'll get out of a lot of hurt and all that. Let me give you an example. So when Tracy and I got married, I had just got out of the military. And in the military, you have to make beds a lot. You're making beds in boot camp, and these drill sergeants come and they holler at you. It's not good enough. I'm like, you can bounce a baby on that bed, I mean, what are you talking about? Look at those angles right there. I don't know, And so I told one of my friends one day, when I get out of the military, I will never make another bed. I will never make another bed the rest of my life. So I get married. And Tracy had the expectation that the last person out of the bed makes the bed. And this is true. I'm being real with you. I show you how childish I am, and so you can realize how childish you are, okay? So Tracy says, you didn't make the bed. I said, no, I didn't make the bed. She said, the last person out of the bed makes the bed. I said, if you're waiting for me to make the bed, you're going to wait a long time. Oh, yeah, I did that. Well, obviously that didn't go well, and so obviously the Lord's dealing with me. And so, eventually after like 30 years, I started making the bed. And so now sometimes I'm up and I wait for her to get out of the bed just so I can make the bed. Well, what was the problem? Two different expectations. I came for one thing and she came for another way, but she communicated with me. I didn't like the communication, but she was very clear that she wanted to make a bed. You know, a few years ago, this video went viral. It was of a major or a colonel doing a commencement graduation, and he was telling people, the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, make your bed. You can do something. I'm like, it's going viral. People are sending it to me. I'm like, you can make your bed. I'll do some push-ups, man. You can do something productive. So again, the problem is that everyone has established a different set of expectations in life. And the only way to avoid conflict is to communicate about your expectations, okay? And so listen, even sometimes people will say, hey, what do you need? And people say nothing. But they really need something. We have to communicate. We have to communicate these things. So at work, even at work, people go to work and they do things, and people have different expectations about work, and there's trouble at work. We've got to see expectations. The reason they get us is because we aren't mature enough to sit down and have conversations about it. We have to conversate. We have to communicate. I've worked my whole life in the people business. Every job I've ever had is in the people business. And I don't know why. I guess God's just wanting to work on me. But I'm still today surprised by people's expectations, even today. So when I worked my way through college, I was going to Texas State and San Marcos, and I worked as a security guard. Then I worked as a desk clerk at Ocarina Springs. Now, Ocarina Springs, it was the building was 100 years old. It was a historical building, okay? Now, it was on the head of the San Marcos River, absolutely beautiful. But people came there, see, it was a 100-year-old building. They had the Hilton down the road that was really nice and luxurious, but your view was the highway. When you came to Ocarina Springs, your view was the river. And I couldn't believe people complained about everything. And I'm like, you don't come to Ocarina Springs for luxury, you come for the view. Go sit on your balcony. But people are coming for one thing, but they're expecting something different. And what I'm saying is, we do that in life. We do that in life as well. And this is very important in life. This is very important. Listen, family life, we're growing. We're getting a lot of new families, but it's different cultures, different ethnicities. And what I'm telling you is, I'm tired of seeing people get offended and mad and angry and leaving the church because their expectations weren't met. But they didn't tell anyone what their expectations were. See, that is called childish behavior, and they're going to go to the next place and they're going to have the same problem. You know, and I was thinking, you know, sometimes as a pastor, I became a pastor because I want to help people. And sometimes, you know, it's just like I'm trying to help people, and it's almost like nothing is good enough. But the problem is just I don't know what they need because they didn't communicate. And so again, if you have friends in church or your friends anywhere, please, I'm just saying, don't get offended, don't get angry, don't get frustrated. Have conversations. And what you may find that your expectations are unrealistic. Or people just don't know what your expectations are. And I think this lesson, you know, this man had unrealistic expectations, and really it cost him to go into eternity without God. Well, if we have expectations that aren't communicated, it affects our quality of life with people we love. It affects our job, our work. It affects our spiritual life. And so my point today is that we have to communicate. First of all, we need to communicate with God, and then we need to communicate with other people so that we make sure, because here's what I know. Most people in life, the last thing they want to do is hurt anyone's feelings. But you can't do for somebody what you don't know. Okay, I know this wasn't a fun lesson, but I hope it helped you. I hope it helped you. Would you stand with me? We're going to ask the worship team to come, and I'm just serious. And in 25 years of counseling and meeting with couples and dealing with hurt, unrealistic expectations or unmet expectations is the greatest source of relational conflict. And we don't want to have relational conflict. We want to have relational blessings. We want to have relational health. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up this morning. And as we worship a little bit more, if you need prayer, we would love the opportunity to pray for you. And I'll come back up here in just a minute and dismiss you.